The Manhattan Project began in 1939 and ended on December 31st of 1945. The result of the project was the full development and creation of the war-winning atomic bomb. Two of these atomic bombs were dropped in Japan in an attempt to end World War II. The first in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and the second in Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. Not only did Japan suffer great defeat to the atomic weapons, but also great tragedy, the casualties of over 200,000 civilians. On the other side, America celebrated its triumph, not only over Japan in the war, but its triumph in science for being the first country to successfully create and utilize an atomic bomb. Not only did America win and end World War II, but weaponry of war was forever changed as more and more countries took cues from America and begun developing atomic weapons of their own, even to this day.
Upon Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939, World War II had officially begun, and it raged on until 1945. Ruling over the Axis powers were the dictators Adolf Hitler, who ruled over Germany, Benito Mussolini, in control of Italy, and Joseph Stalin, who had taken power in Russia. Later in the war, the Axis powers were joined by Japan, which would ultimately result in America joining the war on the side of the Allies and defeating Japan and the Axis powers in the war. Japan initially entered the war with a surprise kamikaze attack on one of America's harbors in Hawaii. This is what prompted America to enter World War II and begin accelerating the construction of the weapons of mass destruction. Near the war's end, America took drastic action and attempted to end the war in Japan. According to History.com, while the war in Europe had ended in April, fighting in the Pacific continued between Japanese forces and U.S. troops. In late July, President Harry S. Truman called for Japan's surrender with the Potsdam Declaration. The declaration promised prompt and utter destruction if Japan did not surrender.
According to Stephen M. Younger, a man who personally worked on the bombs, the Manhattan Project, as it was called, stretched from coast to coast, with nuclear reactors in Washington state, secret mountaintop laboratories in New Mexico, and sprawling manufacturing plants in Tennessee. Just 23 months after its inception, success was demonstrated in a spectacular explosion in Alamogordo, New Mexico on July 16, 1945. While America had started the project in 1939, the Japanese bombing of America's Pearl Harbor caused America to greatly accelerate the rate at which the atomic weapons were developed. Upon this acceleration, more scientists and funding were poured into the project in order to ensure America would be the first to have a functional atomic bomb, and that is what they would soon have. In the months leading up to the decision, there were several communications and meetings between people of political and scientific importance in America and the Allied forces, such as Albert Einstein, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman, and several others. Meetings took place and committees gathered to discuss things like the technology behind the bombs, how much damage would be caused by the bombs, who would carry out the bombing, and whether the U.S. would even need to drop the bombs.
One thing that wasn't uncommon in the time shortly prior to the bombing was the people opposing, petitioning, or protesting against the dropping of the atomic bomb, which of course, people in positions of power didn't take much note of. Those people were protesting the dropping because, as the dropping became more of a real possibility, they became more aware of the sheer power of the bomb and what it would do if it was dropped on a populated city. Some people who were part of the interim committee believed the atomic bomb test should put national security less at risk once again. This was clearly not taken much note of as testing continued as intense as ever. As the date of the first dropping neared, bomb research was continued at full speed. In the first test, called Trinity, a group of observers were set to watch the bomb go off from 27 miles away. Leslie R. Groves, one of the people who directed the Manhattan Project, described what he saw as a blinding flash of light, and the cloud of smoke resembled a rising sun. What America had now were fully developed atomic weapons that could easily change the course of war if used.
Now, America was less than a month away from the first bombing, and new questions arose among those who would direct, control, oversee, and execute the bombing. One of such questions was where in Japan to drop such powerful bombs. The four locations that were considered were Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, and Nagasaki. All four cities were selected based on the fact that there were supposedly people of political power seeking refuge from war in each of the cities, and for having large amounts of important industry. After careful consideration, the first city selected to be bombed, with a population of 350,000, was Hiroshima, likely for the fact that it was an army city, as well as the large amount of supplies, industry, and shipyards. The second city selected was Nagasaki, with a population of 210,000, for being a major shipping and industrial area in Kyushu, an island region in Japan. With only days away from the dropping of the first bomb, The crew that would fly the plane that would drop the first bomb was assembled. They would be flying a Boeing B-29 Super Fortress, a heavy bomber plane. Theirs was called the Enola Gay. It was named after Enola Gay Tibbets, the mother of the person who'd pilot the plane during the Hiroshima bombing, Colonel Paul Tibbets. The rest of the crew consisted of Captain Robert Lewis, the co-pilot, Captain Theodore Van Kirk, the navigator, Captain William Parsons, weapon and mission commander, Lieutenant Jacob Besser in control of the radar, and the only person to be on both planes that dropped bombs, Lieutenant Morris Jepson, the assistant weaponeer, Sergeant George Bob Caron, the tail gunner, Sergeant Wyatt Dusenbury, the flight engineer, Sergeant Joe Stabornik, in charge of radar operation, Sergeant Robert Schumer, the assistant flight engineer, and Private Richard Nelson, a radio operator.
Finally, the day arrived that the first bomb would be dropped. The crew set off in their B-29 and made their way to Japan, carrying the first of the 2 atomic bombs. It had been nicknamed Little Boy for being the smaller of the 2 bombs. Despite its comparatively slightly small size, it yielded an impressive and fearsome 13 kilotons of explosive force, which is equal to 13,000 tons or 26 million pounds of TNT. It was then dropped on Japan's Hiroshima without warning. The blast alone instantly killed around 80,000 people, but that number quickly continued to rise to around 140,000 people, as people who were in or near the blast rapidly developed various types of cancer. This means that even after the explosion, 60,000 casualties were suffered. But this wouldn't be the end, and America made sure of that. America dropped 2 leaflets over the Japanese cities that same day. On the leaflets were notes that explained the situation to the Japanese people and called for their surrender in the war. The leaflets also warned of what would happen if Japan didn't surrender and greatly urged the people to evacuate their cities and heed the warning.
Unfortunately for all the citizens that tragically lost their lives, Japanese leaders did not heed the warning and instead refused to surrender. This was a poor mistake. Just 3 days after the first bomb was dropped, a second bomb was dropped. This bomb was called Fat Man and was indeed named accordingly. It was larger than Little Boy in size and in blast force. It yielded 22 kilotons of force, which is equal to 44 million pounds of TNT, almost twice the power of the first bomb. Despite having almost twice the power, Fat Man only caused about half as many deaths as Little Boy. This is certainly not because it was weaker, but rather the fact that Nagasaki is built irregularly and situated on and around steep hills, making it harder for the blast to expand around the city. However, the bomb's effects were still obviously devastating, killing 40,000 people on impact and later totaling up to 70,000 once again due to several types of cancer and other deadly health issues caused by radiation from the bomb. Soon after this bombing on August 15th, Japan's emperor made the choice to surrender and accept the Potsdam Declaration, effectively ending World War II. America had triumphed. Despite the damage suffered in Japan, President Truman later said in an interview that his objective was to use the atomic bomb purely as a military blow to create a military surrender.
Now that World War II had ended, war no longer posed a threat to most countries, but now there was something new that, although not a major threat, was controversial for multiple countries. America had prompted the beginning of a nuclear race, and Russia was its main competitor. The 2 countries were now in an inadvertent battle to see who could create the most powerful bomb. One of such atomic projects was Operation Crossroads, which was performed in the Bikini Atoll, or the bomb that ended all the competition, the infamous Russian Tsar Bomba. Nobody officially won the competition, but it did seem to stop after the Tsar was dropped. However, even after its competition ended, nuclear development continued around the world as a response to America and Russia's new power. Even in this year, countries like North Korea and Iran continued to develop and test atomic weapons. Otherwise, America and the Allies achieved triumph in war and science, while Japan had suffered great defeat and tragedy in the war for losing over 200,000 civilians' lives to the fearsome power of the atomic bomb.